doing? They're running us around.
So for this one, I wanted to follow up from my last video, which was a while ago, but it was called Tech as Anti-Design. And I wanted to just focus on anti-design as a concept. And I think the most basic description can be kind of two different perspectives. One, it is anti-design is the design work that is done to compensate for the lack of design work in bringing some product into existence. Or alternatively, it's the design work that is done to distract from the use cases that are profitable and, viable for the product to exist. So if you've worked in tech, specifically in startups in the last decade or more, you would have heard of a thing called product market fit, which is a concept which, unsurprisingly, was invented by VCs and popularized by VCs. And it is a kind of formal definition of this process of building something for the sake of building and then finding markets where it fits and, viable markets where, you can build a business on top of it. So it's kind of like this formalization of making something and then finding out what it's for, or then finding things that it can be said it is for. And so off the back of the product market fit concept, you get this, emphasis on this idea of this thing called a use case, right? And a use case is always kind of talked about in the future tense as a potential thing. It's a speculative idea. It's trying to kind of rack your brain to find a way that this collection of mechanisms or this powerful mechanism can somehow be useful to this industry or to this group which have a lot of money and a lot of money to spend and, could turn into a profit for your company. And so a use case is the kind of basis of this whole idea of anti-design, because a use case is essentially the thing that is being designed. So at this point, a lot of people probably would think, well, how do all of these things get built, without having a purpose, without having a design that is like aiming to satisfy a purpose? And the way I see it is there is purposes, but at this stage when these things are being built, there tends to be a lack of consensus among the people making them, like the engineers or the founder of the company who has this idea. Anybody contributing to making this thing, there's a lack of consensus of what the purpose of the thing is. They'll all have their own ideas, or some of them might share some ideas. But one of the main things that I think it comes down to is what I call mechanism lust. And I've made a video about this as well. But basically, it is when, these people come together because they're gathering around this really cool mechanism or this really powerful mechanism that is just really impressive. And, for examples of this, we can talk about the easy examples like blockchains and LLMs, right? They're based on very cool mechanisms that give these really interesting and unique kind of results. And this challenge of being able to make something like that is a really strong motivating factor to make something, because you believe that it must be useful because it is such a cool mechanism. And that puts you in this position where once you do achieve the creation of this mechanism, well, then what do we do with it? How do we make money from it? And so then when you have this powerful mechanism existing as a product without an asserted purpose, like without a clear assertion, a concrete assertion of what it's for, you create this vacuum for purposes. You start attracting all these kinds of purposes. What I've said before about, this common theme among tech products nowadays of creating something and then saying, here, see what you can do with this. Hey guys, like have a play with this and see what you can do. See what cool things you can do. And you attract people to make their own use cases. And this is where an interesting divide happens as far as use cases. And the divide is between individuals and groups or organizations, right? If you're an individual who finds, Notion useful for a very particular process or purpose that you have, what's happening there is that's an accident, right? That is the collection of features that this thing has. Some of those features come together to answer your purpose. But it wasn't designed for that, and there is no reason for it to be optimized for that. It's just an accident that it serves that purpose. And then you become a champion for the product because it is serving your purpose, but they're never going to become a champion for your purpose unless it is a very, very profitable one, which it probably isn't. So at this point, this is where the concept of anti-design really comes into play, because you've created this vacuum of purpose, and you have individuals who are, championing your product with their own little purposes, but you really want to make money. And so what you end up finding, or what these companies end up finding, is that the worst use cases come along, and they tend to be the ones that pay well, right? And by worst use cases, I'm talking about, governments who can use your thing for surveillance, or, the military using your thing to more efficiently kill people, right? And these are the contracts that come along that are the multi-billion-dollar contracts that, of course, the makers of these products are not going to refuse. They're going to take them. But then they create the problem of, well, we didn't create it for anything. We've found this use case that pays really well and, is making us profitable, but it doesn't look good. We can't say that this was the purpose we created it for. In fact, we'll try to hide this as a purpose. We will never mention this on our website, or in our marketing of, a concrete assertion of what this thing exists to do or what it is for. So this is where the anti-design comes in, where you need to design purposes that justify the existence of this thing or distract from the existence of these purposes that are paying the bills. That's why you end up with things like the meta demo of the glasses, with cameras in them, that has some fool standing there with ingredients on the table in a kitchen, asking his glasses to look at the ingredients and tell him how to make some Korean sauce that tastes great. A human being asking a robot how to make something that tastes good. The fact that the demo was a disaster and they blamed it all on the Wi-Fi has nothing to do with this, and that should be ignored, right? The point is that was a demo of a ridiculous use case that, if you take a second to think about it, you would see how ridiculous it is. So I think one of the factors that has really permitted this anti-design to happen and to proliferate is software as a service. Because software as a service is kind of the ultimate evolution of software being ethereal, right? It's software that takes up no space. Software as a service, for those who don't know, is the web-based software that you can open up in your browser. The reason that's important is because it doesn't take up space. And taking up space, for any physical product is like a guardrail, like an unintentional guardrail that makes a product earn that space, right? And you can earn that space two ways that I see, by being useful, or by being useful in the way that it claims to be useful, or by being novel, by being novelty, and being honest about the fact that it is meant to be a novelty. And software as a service, because this doesn't have to be taking up shelf space in a store or being installed on your computer's hard drive and taking up space there, there's much less of a reason for a person to look at it and say, well, why do I need this? What is this doing for me? What is it for? Because it's just a URL in a browser, right? It doesn't take up any space. So when your software as a service product isn't taking up space in store shelves or in a person's computer on their hard drive, it is really much easier to take something that is just a novelty and to design these, use cases that make it seem like it's useful. So, but there is one other factor of software products that is kind of inescapable as far as taking up space in people's lives, and that is payment, right? These things are made by for-profit companies. This is capitalism. They need to make money, and they do that by having people pay for their product. And paying for a product is probably the ultimate taking up space that will force you to think, well, do I need this thing? What is it for, right? But that's covered as well because of subscription models. Every software as a service has a subscription model, which always has a free tier. And the free tier is always the individual or the personal use tier. It's for the single person who has their silly little use case that they find it useful for. But, the payments come with the enterprise contracts. And enterprise contracts create the separation between the person paying for it and the person using it. So again, they escape taking up space in the individual's life and thus escape being asked, what is it for? And so when the organization is paying for these enterprise contracts and imposing this product on their employees, you have the maker of the product. They're using anti-design to create use cases which will sell the product to the enterprise. Then the enterprise, as we see with ChatGPT being forced on employees, the enterprise has to design purposes that justify the cost of the enterprise contract of this thing. Okay, to sum things up, anti-design is the design work that's done to compensate for the lack of design work that was done in the creation of the thing, or it's the design work that's done to distract from the use cases that came along that pull in the money, that are viable use cases but are not quite socially acceptable. And so they need to create use cases that distract from that.